Welcome back to the marketplace. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about possible policies and tax changes. We have industry players and professionals to just give us an insight on how exactly that's going to pan out. Before we went on a break, we were talking to the head of policy for the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, Job Wanjohi, who is just going to be telling us now. When it comes to policy making, we are champions in this country. We have a lot of people who have a lot of information, who put policies in place, but implementation is where we draw the line. As manufacturers, do you feel heard? Do you see implementation taking place? Are you benefiting from these policies?
Yeah, I would say that in the spirit of public participation that is enshrined in the Constitution, government listens.
Right.
But the extent of being heard, what I would call now the adoption of the policy prescription that manufacturers, the tourism sector, the retail sector has made to the government, you find is a bit wanting.
Right.
So that means there is an archive of very many policy prescriptions that are very helpful to the government, but you find at the end of it all, there is push and pull, and you find that there is non-implementation.
Right.
I would give an example of the Finance Act 2023. We had a heavy discussion around paper and paper sector. Some papers called craft liners and whatnot.
Right.
Some are used in exportation of our tea. We told the government that imposition of some certain levies is going to have a negative effect on the sector.
Right.
And government did not listen until some companies had to shut.
Right.
And now under the Finance Bill 2024 is when the government was considering that they are likely now to drop some of those levies because the imposition of such levies on imported raw materials and intermediate products was hurting the input level or the stocks for further processing by some of these countries, by some of these companies. So that's what I'm saying. The government needs to look at the data because we are living at a data-driven environment all times, whereby we present to the government a very good case by telling them that some of these raw materials are not available in the country. Intermediate products are not available in the country. Can you even have a joint verification committee that comprises of the government, comprises of the private sector, and then we have a sign-off of a report that differentiates some of these products. So I would say that to a certain extent, the government listens. To a certain extent, we are heard and it is adopted. But to another large extent, you find there's something that is a bit wanting. And the government needs to relax its mental muscle so that we can have an effective discussion and a progressive discussion. All
right, very interesting insights there. Robert, let's talk numbers. He's talking about, a data-driven approach to all our problems because this could solve a majority of our problems. When it comes to tax collection, the government keeps telling us we're broke as a country. We don't make enough money. We do not collect enough money. A lot of our sectors are ailing. But when it comes to the global perspective, it seems like we're doing well because we're one of the leading countries in many things. When it comes to tax collection, what is the difference that we're seeing?
So let's start from here, Hibak. Given our revenue performance, Revenue Authority, and they're not probably anybody's favorite, but they're doing a decent job given the circumstances that they're operating in. I mean, last year they closed at about 2.4 trillion. That's out of a target of 2.5 trillion. That's quite commendable. This year their target was 2.9 trillion. Of course, the Finance Bill 2024 went out, and so that's going to come down. Now, in terms of data, we need to ask ourselves, what is this data telling us? So, for example, if you look at the July 2024 collections for VAT, it was about 20 billion shillings. July 2023 was 22 billion shillings. June 2024 was 24 billion. What is this? What are these numbers telling us? They're telling us that there's something that the system is not optimal because we can't just be jumping. There's no way you can explain 24 billion in June, then 20 billion in July. There's definitely something wrong. And this is why I agree with Job here that we need to pull back and say, what are the statistics telling us? Do we think that we have got a revenue leakage somewhere, or do we need to expand the tax base? And I really like his point because the Finance Act 2023 also brings the controversy that is there, lack of certainty. So today, in fact, the fundamental question is, Now that we have a stay,
Right.
between 1st of August and 19th of August, what taxes should we have raised?
All right.
Yeah.
Daktari, let me just get your insight on this. Of course, when it comes to tax collection, we could be doing well, but we should be doing better. Now, the Cabinet Secretary did point out that when it comes to automation, when we moved to e-TIMS, some gaps were presented where we were losing billions of shillings, and we don't know how. When it comes to you as a CEO, when your business was being taken through the transition into e-TIMS, some of the changes that you witnessed, how do you feel the government treats tax collection as a business?
I just, maybe the best word to borrow is I think what Job is saying, relaxing the mental muscle, because we are not adversaries,
Right.
both business and government. We are in this together. We belong to this nation. We have to develop it together. So,
Right.
and we need to have continuous conversation. So when you move from one system to the next, the intentions are good. The idea is how do we then improve on the efficiency of tax collection? But how do we move from the intentions to how we actually do it? I think that's what the question is. So if you're looking at e-TIMS, for example, and looking at the data, I like what FCPA is talking about. Looking at the data, does the data show us that there's been any improvement over the last few months that we've had e-TIMS, for example? I don't think so, because you very quickly look at, again, VAT collection for July last year and July this year. A 4 billion difference.
Right.
So how do you explain that?
Right.
That transition, either it's not been handled well, or, well, let's be fair on both sides. There's always issue of resistance to change.
Right.
Okay, from the business end.
Right.
But what does that mean? Then it means that the issue of public participation needs to be taken a notch higher. Everybody else needs to be brought on board. There has to be not really consensus, but some sort of buy-in and taking people through why this transition is necessary.
Right.
So that sometimes businesses don't end up feeling that some of these transitions in terms of the technology we're using is just an extra burden, an extra cost, an extra this and that. And I think that's the element that we need to be discussing and how to do it better.
Right. When it comes to solutions, I feel like, gentlemen, we keep circling around the same thing because we keep talking about public participation. Job, you did say that the government fairly listens to, when it comes to manufacturers at least, it fairly listens to them. Now, the government has been very keen on value addition, especially for manufacturers, to consider some of the revenue we could be having within the country where made in Kenya things are used by Kenyans themselves. However, these policy changes are, I'm sure, bringing a lot of problems when it comes to manufacturers. What are some of the solutions you would propose?
One issue that has been raised by Bob is change management. As a country, we have been over-dependent on the imports. That's why our import bill is high. We are net importer on almost every food product, be it wheat, be it maize, be it all these, groundnuts and everything else.
Right.
But as we are moving towards value chain integration, whereby we have one who is roasting the groundnuts here, sourcing from our own farms in the country, another one is who is doing agro-processing here in terms of packaging and taking to the supermarkets, instead of getting from Malawi as groundnuts or getting it from Southern America, they're sourcing locally. There's heavy lifting that need to be done on that value chain.
Right.
And that's something that we need to agree on. Instead of just saying that we have abundance in this raw material or this intermediate product locally, or even in the region like East African community, it's good to look at the data again.
Right.
We have an economic survey that is produced by KNBS, Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, that shows what is our local production and what is imported.
Right.
So this would help us to determine at what point are we going to impose a duty, are we going to impose some policy measures to deter importation of that product so that we do backward integration. Or now, because we are self-sufficient.
Right.
So it's a very good model. We are very supportive of it. Like now, an association, we have come up with what is called agriculture for industry.
Right.
So that we remove the information asymmetry between the producers and the processors. Because you find in between there's an intermediator who gives different sets of information to these two producers.
Right.
The farmer's pricing is different from the pricing that is getting to the processor.
Right.
Or even when you're talking about the quality, instead of in what we call the global standardization, you find that the qualities that are being spelled out to the farmers is different from what the processors want this side. So we've come up with that project so that we can match up the needs of the processors to the needs of the farmers.
Right.
And in between, I can give an example of like now the leather sector. You find that if we are able to integrate the leather sector in the country,
right.
in fact, to give statistically, we are the third largest owner of animals in Africa.
Right.
But in terms of value addition, we are doing less because we are exporting raw hide and skin,
right.
or what we call the crust that is exported to a place like Italy,
right.
which doesn't have enough animals. But you find that's where we are getting our shoes,
right.
our leather belts from, our jackets from, and out of that cow. The value of cow, 70% is not in the meat.
Right.
It is in the raw, in the hide and skin.
Right.
So if you look at that, and then we're able to do a value addition here locally. Currently, we have 14,000 workers in the leather industry. We can be able to jump to 100,000 workers in a span of 7 years.
All right.
If you're talking about GDP contribution, substantial increment. If you're talking about the revenue generation within that sector,
right.
moving from about 15 billion Kenya shillings to about 100 billion Kenya shillings, which is quite huge.
Right.
If you look in terms of investments that are going to be done along that value chain, it's quite huge. Right. But again, as we do this, we have to look at levels of competitiveness.
Right.
We have to address our governance issues. We have to ensure that we are not only producing for our local markets, we're also producing for exports so that we can generate the wealth. We can be able to correct our forex situation at the moment, or even in the next 7 years,
right.
whereby we are reducing on the import, we're increasing on the export, and subsequently it brings the health that is required in the economy. So the movement towards the value chain integration is quite critical, but we need to sit down with the government and agree what is a transitional period. If you're talking about this product from being imported to being to be sourced locally, it requires 6 years.
Right.
What are the measures within those 6 years? So that's on the 6th year we are abundant in production of that product, and then duties can be imposed.
All right, good points there, Job. And one thing I've latched onto is the fact that we could heal our exchange rate the traditional way, right? We could do it slowly, but it could ensure that we have a more stable economy in the long run. FCPA, maybe if I could just, pick your brain a little bit. And he did say that we should be moving backward. We should be, looking at the problems from the root before we solve them. When it comes to auditing, that is a major problem in this country, because we have the Office of the Auditor General who points out so many problems and gaps. She gives, or the office gives, solutions and possible recommendations that the government never uses. What do you think about our auditing process? What are some of the changes we should see from the government side in order to ensure that we reduce our expenditures?
Well, that's a good question, Hibak, because one of the things that was in the Finance Bill 2024 that unfortunately did not make it through was the government transitioning from a cash accounting model to an accrual accounting. Cash accounting means that your county government can come and buy a 10 million vehicle,
right.
and there's absolutely no accounting for it because we are using cash.
Right.
However, accrual, I will go to the supplier and I will recognize that there's that transaction and there's that liability. And I think that is something that as a country we need to really think about moving, because then you're giving the Auditor General the tools that they need in order to track these expenditures appropriately. So
right.
that's the first thing. But I also think that our problems from a tax perspective cannot be resolved they need a multi-pronged approach. You need to, for example, look at the expansion of the tax base.
Right.
Do we have sufficient people who are paying taxes? If you think about including even our deficit now, I think our deficit is now 4.3%,
right.
Up from 3.3%. That's a huge growth.
Right.
We need to also think about cutting down our expenditure. I know government has tried to do it, but the feeling is, can you cut a bit more? Because you are approaching the limit of tax revenues. And I think also there is a need to think about which tax revenues are we focusing on. If you look at our mix today, income tax accounts for about 48% of the total revenues collected. I mean, this year the target is about 1.2 trillion, VAT is about 800 billion. It's about 1.5 times of VAT. Is it time we thought about reducing the tax on the individual and the businesses so that you can spur consumption and you can collect VAT, for example?
Right.
And I like the points that he's making about, value addition, because when you reduce the tax on his salary, it means that we can manufacture the belts in Kenya. It means he can spend that, we can create employment, we can collect more taxes. So I think that it's not a one-size solution or a solution to just around one aspect.
A one-size-fits-all.
You need expenditure management, you need governance, you need additional taxpayers to come on board.
Right, gentlemen, I feel like we're solving the problems of the economy already. We're doing very well. Daktari, you're an economist, right? When it comes to the gross domestic product addition from the manufacturing sector, it's been stunted at 7.8%, and it's been this way for a very long time. When the Kenya Kwanza government was coming into power, they were so big on ensuring that we hit 15% by 2027, which is just a few years away, and 20% by 2030. Believe it or not, it's probably going to be a bit impractical. Why do you think this is? What are some of the things we could do to spur more productions, especially in manufacturing?
At the risk of sounding like, we are still talking about the problems, I think when it comes to manufacturing, it's out there. Part of the reason why our manufacturing sector is not doing very well is the cost of energy, the cost of raw materials, the infrastructure, the tax regime, so on and so forth. And there's one unsaid one. Most of it's really not a tax item. Most of our local authorities, or what we call county governments right now, I think they need to be sensitized to be a little more friendly. The manufacturers, at least the ones outside Nairobi, because you need to start treating manufacturers or business people as people who are actually adding value to the nation. We tend to come from the extreme end of where most manufacturers at times are actually treated like criminals. So those are the things that are contributing to this, probably a lot more. But in terms of solution, again, I think there are many, many things we need to do. For example, there are a lot of things we have to stop importing. If we, as a nation, there is a conversation we need to start having. If we are talking about having an expenditure problem, why do we, for example, bring in furniture for government offices from outside the country? Because we're exporting jobs, we're exporting businesses. If we stop that in terms of that, curing both issue of manufacturing, locally made furniture, and issue of forex, we address it simultaneously. I could go on in a number of areas that we can actually address. I don't know how many of you realize that now, even basic things like school uniform, we have school uniform coming in from other nations. I don't want to name any specific nation. And I think one of us mentioned that we are net importer of basically everything, onions to eggs and all that. So long as we are spending the little forex that we don't have, because we are not earning enough, we are not, we are not exporting enough, then again, to come back, the person who is in manufacturing, at the end of the day, is a business person. So they're looking for an environment where they will produce at the minimal cost. What I've had, and I think what every Kenyan talks about, is the cost of electricity, for example. How quickly can we address that? Right? Yes.
Thank you so much, Daktari. Now, Job, he said something very interesting. He said that some manufacturers who are not within the city are being treated like criminals. Now, let's put that aside, right? Let's talk about going to the global markets. There's the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which, could propel a lot of businesses to the global front. We have so many pacts that we have made with the EU, we've made with, even the US. And some of these things, a lot of businesses don't even know about. From a solution-centric point of view, how can we connect a lot of our manufacturers, a lot of our businesses with the international markets?
I think sensitization is quite critical, so that like now at the African Continental Free Trade Area, to understand which are these tariff lines or products that we can export to, you know, the Southern Regional Economic Bloc, or to the Northern Economic Bloc, what is called the Sahel, right, or to the West, to the Western Africa, because we have some tariff lines that have already been liberalized, and you can import your products or export your products to some of these economies or some of these countries without paying any duty. Right. What you're now trying to fix is the physical connectivity. If it is not physical connectivity, you're trying to fix the the sea movement of the goods and services. So sensitization is quite critical. The other thing that I also need to do is there's great support by the government. For instance, when you look at the movement by sea, we don't have a special purpose vessel that is moving the goods across Africa. Right. We have to depend on intermediation. Some of our goods have to go to Spain before they come back to Africa. Right. So the sensitization, logistics, ensuring that we are standardizing our goods, right, so that the goods that are moving from Kenya and they're going to Egypt or they're going to South Africa, right, they are not facing what we call the technical barriers to trade, right, or non-tariff barriers, and subsequently you can find that you are able to trade well. The other thing also is aggregation. If you are a small manufacturer or you're a small producer, you are only producing 3 tons or 5 tons. Right. At the aggregation centers at the country level or even at the regional level are very critical, so that we drive what is called the critical mass. Right. If we can be able to have 250 containers or 300 containers, then they can fit in one ship, and we can be able to trade across even if it's Africa, if we're talking about economic partnership agreement with UK or with EU, and again also something else very important to note. Right. It is good that we drive our competitiveness, because some of these trade agreements that you're opening in the next 20-25 years, we'll be trading with the European Union. They will be bringing all their goods into Kenya, and subsequently, if we don't become competitive enough, you'll find that our goods are more costlier than what is coming from Europe, and you find that we are being driven away from industrialization, and we're becoming just a supermarket. All right, just a supermarket. What are the odds? Gentlemen, I have a minute each for each of you. I'll start with you, FCPA Robert. Maybe if you could just tell us, now that we're concluding, we see where the government is taking this country, we see some of the policy changes. What would you tell the government, Robert?
I think we need to have adequate public participation, because what we don't want is another finance bill or tax laws amendment bill withdrawn. That's number one. I think number two, there is really need to sharpen the pencil as far as expenditure is concerned. We're already in a very constrained space, so it would be very good. I think it would be a good gesture from government to cut down on some of its expenditure, and so that we can get out of this hole. But lastly, I think just also trying to use the resources that they collect prudently, then you boost tax morale. That really is it.
Right, that would solve a lot of problems. Dr. maybe give us your insights. How can we solve our problems as a country?
I would like to address myself to what everybody is talking about, cost of living. It's getting tough. Right. I mean, if we are to unwrap that and break it down, it comes down to the basics. How are people accessing food, clothing, shelter, education, health, so on and so forth. So what is it that we can do to make that a little more affordable than it is? Well, we are seeing a few interventions in farming, and I think that needs to continue. Right. But we also need to be open to the reality that part of the reason why we are talking about the cost of living being high is the issue of our circulation of money at the moment. Right. And you trace it back, it goes to the fact that our debt burden is quite high. Right. So our revenue, what we are collecting from taxes, a high percentage is going back to, paying our debts. Right. And what we are having in terms of capital expenditure is minimal. And ultimately, and remember that in an economy like ours, the biggest consumer is government. Right. So if it's not spending money, then people don't have money in their pockets. All right. And we are all crying.
All right, let's solve our problems tonight. Job, what would you recommend?
Mine is opportunities and opportunities and opportunities that are in this country. If every sector that is represented in this country would do what we call the deep dive, The government owns up to its problems. The private sector owns up to its problems, and we find a middle ground and a solution, and we move forward.
Right.
There are jobs that are going to be created, investment will be created, and you'll find government will collect revenues from us, and even refund at the end of the year.
Right, very interesting. What Job is saying is that we must all soul search, because it's not always the other person's problem. It could be our own mistakes that is leading to this. Instead of fighting against the government, through the government, by the government, we are the government. We could be solving our own problems through public participation. That is what we have for you tonight on The Marketplace. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next week on The Marketplace, where we'll be having an exciting topic, I bid you adieu. My name is Hibak Said.